Then we're ready.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Cassie Riva. I'm the Director of Events at Harvard Bookstore, a locally owned, independently run Cambridge landmark since 1932. On behalf of the store, I'm so pleased to introduce tonight's virtual event with KATEE Robert, presenting the fourth book in our Dark Olympus series, Radiant Sin, in conversation with Mina Jane, and briefly Eloisa James, aka author Mary Bly. Before we get started, I'd like to invite you to visit us online at harvard.com and sign up for our weekly email newsletter so you can learn more about our event series and see all of our upcoming and in-person virtual events. During the Q&A portion of this event, you're going to be able to ask your questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. KATEE's new book is so good, and you can order a copy by clicking the link I'm going to post in the chat after this introduction. And finally, I want to say thank you to the Ashland Public Library for hosting this event and on their Zoom, and thank you to the audience for buying books from Harvard Bookstore. Your support means the world to us and ensures the future of a local independent bookstore, so thank you. Now I'd like to turn it over to Mina Jane, who's the director of the Ashland Public Library. She's a lifelong reader of romance and a fierce advocate for the genre. She and her romance book club have been reading books by KATEE Robert for years, so this is sure to be a wonderful conversation. We're very excited. Hi, Mina.
Hi, I'm back. Thank you, Cassie, so much. I really appreciate that. I'm going to ask KATEE to join me on screen because this is all about her. So yes, this is KATEE Robert. I'm not going to say too much about her except that we love her books. We read them like candy. And if you're here, you know what I'm talking about. So KATEE, can you start with just telling us a little bit about yourself and Radiant Sin?
Yes, I've been doing this author thing for, I think we're in year 11 now. And I'm an old in the author career, but I'm just having the most fun out of my career to date in the last couple of years and the next couple of years. And that includes Radiant Sin, which I have on me like a professional. Radiant Sin is the fourth Dark Olympus book, which I do recommend reading in order just for most bang for your buck. And it's like it's a KATEE Robert slow burn in that they hook up at 50% instead of 10%. So manage your expectations. And it's kind of my love song to like murder mysteries, like Clue, the vibe. And it's a grumpy sunshine. She's the grumpy. We have a plus size heroine. It's just all of my favorite things like thrown together and shaken up and came out like this.
Love it. Oh my gosh. And your covers are just gorgeous.
Stunning. Yeah, the vibe is just, the colors are, I'm obsessed.
So I do want to let everybody know that Eloisa James is going to join us in a few minutes to ask KATEE some questions because she stayed up until 3 a.m. reading Radiant Sin the other night and just needed to talk about it. So she'll be here in about 5 minutes and we can't wait to talk to her. But in the meantime, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A anytime and I will moderate them with KATEE. In the meantime, I'm going to ask my question. So this is the fourth book in the series, but it's also a book in a long running sort of like world series. How did this come to you?
I have always loved Cassandra and the idea of like knowing the future, but nobody believes you. And like her encounter with Apollo and that she managed to get to become a Cirrus and didn't give him what he wanted in exchange. And yeah, that's why she got cursed, but it's like that dynamic fascinated me. And I really wanted to tell the story of Olympus from somebody who isn't shining in the light of like goldenness or isn't one of the 13 and doesn't actually have any power of their own. And like, what does that look like? And what does it look like to have to know and see things that other people don't see because you kind of live not exactly in the margins, but like a little bit. Mm-hmm. And I didn't set out to have Apollo be the softest hero I've ever written, but it just sort of worked out like that. He's like many Greek or why all the Greek gods. It's like there's myths of him where he is very much the villain. There's a lot of them. And then there's ones where he's like softer. And I decided to kind of pull for that just because you got to throw like some goodness in there, like with the power of like what does it look like if you actually take it seriously and you feel that power as a burden instead of like license to just, run amok.
Mhm.
And so it's kind of accumulation of that, and that I feel like I've been setting up dominoes, and especially in the first 3 books. And this book tips the dominoes over. So, and then from here on out, it's pedal to the metal and clutch your pearls. Here we go. So you get a breath, you get to breathe through this book. And then after that, we'll see.
Breathing is totally overrated. Um, but what I mean by like, how did this come to you? I mean, the idea of using mythology as the cornerstone of this series. I know you loved mythology all of your life, but like, what brought you to using those characters, that world, to make your world?
It felt very natural to come from fairy tale retellings, which is like my one true love is fairy
Mhm.
tales, and mythology is very much kissing cousins with fairy tales, and that you get a lot of arguments over, well, that's not the original version, or that's not, but that's a very like Christian view of things, of like a one true version of events. And
Mhm.
it's, mythology started as an oral tradition before it was written down by the dude, because it was always dudes back then, who wrote down those stories, and they put their politics into it. And I've read so many different adaptations of like them, and I love it, but Greek mythology is filled with tragedies, not romance, and there's not a lot of happily ever afters. And so unlike fairy tales, where like most of the time the good guys win and like right off into the sunset to one degree or another, it's not necessarily true in myth. So I decided if I was going to do retellings or remixings, or like whatever you want to call it, because they're not strict retellings, obviously. I wanted to kind of like do it justice for the characters and the gods and goddesses that I really enjoyed, which means things like, down with Odysseus and Paris, because like I will hold a vendetta until the day I die over those two for different reasons. And a lot of that is just taking the core of these characters who have persisted through generations untold to kind of just, do my spin on it, throw my hat into the ring.
Well, obviously it's paid off because we love it. Because underneath all of that, like sort of tragedy, there is so many opportunity for those connections.
Well, there's such a compelling story. Like, there's a reason why they have persisted. There's a reason why Greek mythology isn't a practiced religion for the most part these days, but those stories are still told over and over and over again. It's because they're so incredibly compelling, and the characters are so just strong and like identifiable and flawed, like so flawed. Every one of them is. And so it's just a lot of fun to take those elements and kind of see how I can reimagine them in a way that feels familiar to the people who know the myth, but is not necessarily just a strict retelling.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think it was right for this kind of series because of those, romance readers will read anything, but having some sort of knowledge of it and having it turn like that is amazing.
Oh yeah. Well, it's one of those things that like, I think as much as I love the classical retellings like Madeline Miller, just like my heart, yes. I like the freshness of like having them not be magical necessarily. And it's like, what does power look like when it's not, lightning bolts from the sky?
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Hello, Eloisa.
Hi.
Welcome.
Hi,
Katie and I
Katie.
are trying not to, we're trying not to plots, but we are probably not going to succeed. So for people who are here tonight, Eloisa James is the queen of historical romance and also writes as Mary Bly, and has some amazing books out under that name, but also is a professor of Shakespeare at Fordham University. And I believe has some very specific questions for Katie that I think are fascinating. So I'm going to pop out and let you guys have a great conversation for a few minutes.
Okay.
Awesome.
All right. I just want to say thank you for letting me come, Katie. This is fantastic. I'm a huge, huge fan. So very thrilling. I've already read, Radiant Sin. I read it the night it came out. So yay.
Thank you so much. Like I'm trying not to fangirl, but thank you for coming.
No, they're great. So I do have questions, and I would love to be here the whole time, except my husband's an Italian professor and he has 26 Italian grad students out in my living room. So I have to go back and make sure, the wine gets filled. But okay, so here's a question. These are kind of, I'm putting on my English professor hat here. But, when I first started reading your series, I couldn't help thinking that if you look at Olympus, if you look at the actual myths, these stories talk about really weird sex, like, let's do it with a bull, let's do it with a swan, why not go every direction? And then as I was reading your series, it seems to me you are kind of focusing in each book on a sexual preference that is newly sort of welcomed in America in a way. I mean, not that various preferences haven't always been there as long as humans have been around, but in the romance world, they've have new tractability. And so I was wondering if you picked the Olympic myths because they are so sexually radical, and then said, hey, I'll just do this and this and this. I mean, how did it come about?
That was definitely a degree of it, in that the myths are so violent and sexy and like very primed to bring into like a dark-ish romance.
Yeah.
And I'm a very character first writer. And because I write such high heat, I find that the characters sort of inform what the sex looks like in that relationship. And so I don't necessarily set out to like say, we're going to check off this box for this couple or whatever, but because they are the characters that I'm pulling from, and because they are informed by the myths, it does sort of naturally incline itself into some of these different like kinks. It's funny because I have a friend who used to be a dominatrix, and so I'll text her and be like, I think I'm writing like puppy play. Like, I think this is a thing that I'm doing. It happens very organically. And then I have to like retroactively do research to make sure that I'm, showing appropriate representation for it. But it's definitely, I end up as surprised as anybody else on what ends up in these books. Cause it's like, I'm a pantser, so it doesn't necessarily, I don't plan it out ahead of time what those will be. But yeah, it's been very interesting exploring that though.
Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, I saw Cassandra kind of taking shape on the page there with reference to, the myth, and then that actually becoming part of her sexual journey in a really, in a way that it isn't in the myth, which I thought was really interesting.
Yeah, I like to, or at least in this series, at least starting with with book 3 in particular, because that does not end happily in the originals, kind of giving justice for the characters that I think were underserviced in myth. And Cassandra's definitely one of them, because she was clever enough to try to outwit Apollo. It didn't quite work out for her, but she did end up with some pretty cool powers, even if it didn't serve in the end.
Yeah, I have to say, I mean, I bet I'm speaking for a lot of the readers around here. I don't remember that much. And so I just went with whatever, was Cassandra. I mean, everyone remembers Cassandra. But the polyamory, that one, which name I can't remember. That's not Neon Gods.
Wicked Beauty.
Wicked Beauty, right? That had a real Shakespeare overtone to me. I don't know if you ever read Trillis and Cressida. Did you?
No, that's one of the few I haven't.
Well, almost no one has, because it's really bad. But I will say that Shakespeare was there with you on that whole idea of polyamory. And anyway, so here's another question. I think there's a tremendous amount of body positivity in this whole series, right? It's really something that after the first book I was looking for, and I know that other readers were too, because I think I told this to Pam, but I'm teaching a class right now on genre fiction at Fordham, which is my university. And so I have 16 kids, and we've had very lively discussion of books, which has been a lot of fun. And one thing we were talking about was the modiste, the couture designer who's like down in Hades, right? Who's been pushed out because she was too forthright. And then, but it's like there's this almost like a myth that you're creating in the books, like this dream of the couture designer who actually understands a woman's body and isn't afraid. And this is something I thought with the last book, when she designs the dress that actually has folds that go out from the hips. So rather than being a couture designer who's trying to sort of subdue, you know, a woman's curviness, she's actually like, let's go for it, right? Let's make it, you know, and then come in, and it's a different kind of designing than anything I thought about or that I've heard about. So is that just like a myth that you're putting in there, like the dream of Olympus and magic powers? Where
Yeah,
did that come from?
I definitely, my books, I specifically write for escapism. And so like my queer folk don't have friction for their identities. And
Yeah.
while my fat characters, there is some level of friction there a little bit, I don't really like to write them writing like they're at peace with their bodies. Like they had to fight hard to get there, but they are. But I definitely, it's something that I struggle with personally. I think a lot of folk do. And I started following more plus sized influencers and just kind of immersing myself into, like before I ever wrote this series, immersing myself into that, because it's like I want to be able to see that as much as I see the skinny, you know, traditionally whatever. And so when I wrote Psyche in particular, that's kind of what I drew on, because it's like these women for the most part are forcibly carving out a space for themselves in an industry that is actively hostile to them. And that kind of feels like Olympus is actively hostile to Psyche for a number of reasons. And Juliet was like, the designer was a little bit of I didn't intend to set out to have her show up in every single book doing these really like proactive things that like push against that culture. But it's kind of become, a theme that I really enjoy playing with, because I think fashion can be its own kind of battle. And I think that like Christian, oh gosh, Serrano, I think is his last name.
Soriano is the only couture designer I know.
Yeah. And in the fact that he came into the fashion game, which I'm not the most like fashion, like connected people. I just really like him. And the fact that like you had like Leslie Jones, who could not find a designer to design for her, and he did. And there's all these actresses who have like non-traditional body types, and he's filling that role for them in a way that they look amazing and beautiful. And it's revolutionary. And I definitely wanted kind of Juliet to play that role a little bit for, because that's how a lot of my women in this series do battle, is with public perception and beauty and what that looks like. And I just think that while the fat representation in romance is significantly better than it was, 5, 10, 20 years ago, I really want to make sure that it's represented in my work as well, in a way that feels positive and people feel seen and can find like a safe harbor to kind of explore those feelings, because that's kind of what I'm doing with my writing. So I hope that they feel that as well.
No, I'm pretty sure they do. I mean, it's a lovely, you're providing a lovely window in. I think also because Juliet is a little magical, she's got her racks of clothing and then they rattle and she walks out from the darkness. And I didn't notice till like this last time. I was like, whoa, she's like the Wizard of Oz there, except she's got the real thing going, right? Were you thinking of like Wizard of Oz? Like kind of?
Not necessarily, more just, I find that fierceness to be very attractive. And so I keep writing side characters that I'm just like, I love you the most out of everyone. I'm sorry you don't have a book. I don't know. And I just love her so much that I think that kind of comes through. I find that my subconscious is much smarter than I am when writing, because it's like these themes crop up, and in hindsight, or when I go through edits, I'm like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Let's work that in. But when I'm actually drafting, it's completely unintentional.
Right. No, I'm the same way. You only figure out later that you've written what they, if any academics were interested in us, which they're not, it would be like a subtext, a shadowing subtext, like, oh, whatever. But let me ask one more question, then I'll have to run back. I thought there's a real underpinning in Olympus with celebrity culture, right? With the damage that celebrity culture can cause, and and the constant being watched, like everyone there being watched all the time and judged all the time. I mean, it's like a Twitter on steroids, except
Yeah.
they are influencers. So what are you thinking about that? Do you think it's a really terrible thing in our society, or do you want to make it better? Or
I think that I think that it's like honestly a little bit horrific, just because like even just brushing against the edges of it, as I know you have as well, of like being like influencer adjacent is a lot, like because they're mostly normal people who have kind of been thrust into this public. And I know actors and actresses probably get publicity training, but like normal people don't. And
no.
but I also have been really incredibly fascinated by the court of public opinion and how that can turn against actors and actresses. And like everybody hated Anne Hathaway for no reason for a very long time. And it's like, how, if you're harnessing that energy, it felt very natural to take like the gods and put them in like a celebrity status and like use that as their power of how they manipulate and how they interact with like the masses. And that's something that as the series continues, it's like, what happens if they turn on you? Like what happens if you lose that power and they realize that there's only 13 of you and you're, just people like them and you're flawed? Like where's your protection at then? And it's definitely something that like as my career has kind of done its thing, I grapple with a lot of like, where's the responsibility? Where's the line? Where are your boundaries at? And so it's kind of a lot of fun to play with that in a like on a grander scale than I will ever experience, thankfully.
Right. Well, I mean, I would say one thing that unites your heroines is they're very kind. So if we could all
Aphrodite's
behave
not.
kindly in the public stage, on the public space, it'd be really nice. I mean,
yeah, it's very interesting writing, because I wrote Helen in the third one, and then the fifth one is her sister Eris, now Aphrodite, and the way that they interact with the public versus the other heroines is marked, especially Aphrodite, because she doesn't push back against it the way Helen does. Like she is her father's daughter, and she like will do the bad thing and the evil thing in order to serve the masses. And it's very interesting writing heroine. Well, I mean, there's a good variety in there, but like her in particular was one of my favorites because she's not particularly kind. Like she's mean, she's vicious, and she is ruthless to a fault. And it's very fun to write like the unsympathetic or the unlikable heroine, because she needed to do that to survive. And so like, what does that look like? Like, let's find out together.
it's hard though. I mean, I have found that extremely difficult in my life because, readers can get so judgmental. They want to be in love. And if you can't figure out how to make them fall in love, it can be really delicate.
Yeah, it's going to be, I mean, this one, Radiant Sin was easy. It was easy because they were in love from page one. It's just a lot of mutual pining. It's writing the more toothy ones are my favorite, because it's like, how do you navigate this? Like, you actively hate each other, and how do I get you to a point where people will believe that you might actually be true partners and want to be together? And I really enjoy that challenge. It's a lot of fun for me.
I have to say, I think that's the challenge of romance, right? It's, can you get the reader to the point where they believe it's not going to work? Like I think you said, it's Wicked Radiance, right? It was very unclear to me how you were going to make that work, because whoever won the contest, someone else was going to get screwed. And and so even if you can see the polyamory warming up, it's still that was really smart, because it was really hard to see how it was going to work.
While I was writing it, I was not entirely sure how it was going to work either, because I was like, Helen and Achilles are so similar and so sure that this is the thing that they need. Like, what happens if they don't get it? Like, what then? I'm really pleased with how it turned out, but I was very stressed through the last half of that book writing it, because I was like, I don't know how we're gonna wrap this up.
Yeah, Shakespeare's Patroclus, there's nothing, it's never going to work. And so there's this terrible tragedy attached to him, feeling of it, which I thought, I could really see in it's probably in the original myth too, which I don't know that much about, but I thought you did that brilliantly. So anyway, I really should get back to that, but
Thank
I
you
just
so
want to
much
say
for
it's a
coming.
real thrill to say hi. It's a thrill to drop in. I'm so grateful to have been invited, and I have to say, go for it. I mean, your books are fabulous. Like,
Thank you.
and it's not just me, my class loves them, and they're all, I've got first years, sophomores, juniors, seniors. They love them.
Oh, awesome.
So,
Thank
thank
you,
you for
Eloisa,
having
so
me
much
so
for
much.
being here.
Thanks, Nina.
Yeah.
Hi, everybody.
So wow. You won't be getting
Sorry,
it.
I'm having a moment.
Take your time. Take your time.
I was like, was I cool? Was I cool? Did I hold it together? I don't know.
You totally did. I mean, like you were totally making sense, putting sentences together. I don't know how you did it.
Perfect. It's a win.
So take a moment. And
Okay.
then so I'm gonna go to some audience questions right now because I have a bunch just from what Eloisa said, and then I'll get back to those. So Levy says, or Levy, is there a family name for the Hades-like character there that, like, as in Cassios for the Zeus line?
There probably should be, but I have not named it on the page, and I probably won't because there's only one. I mean, there has only been one, but now they're gonna have a baby, or twins technically, which I don't know if has shown up in text. I've been writing like Hades and Persephone, like novellas and shorts and stuff that will be available soon. But she's pregnant with twins, but like the whole series takes place over like 8 to 10 to 12 months. Like it's like a year. So it's trying to plan out that timing has been awful. But yeah, so now that there's going to be babies, I should figure out what his last name is. At some point I'll put it in there.
Well, she's
I will.
definitely like, oh my God, twins.
Yeah,
And then somebody asked it. People in general start their question with books are great. I was wondering if we would see more of Artemis. I feel like we've seen the least of her and Hephaestus compared to the other 13 members.
I will see a bit more of Artemis. She doesn't feature heavily into the next two books just because they're so incredibly focused on their polyamorous relationships, which are at the cornerstone of like the other stuff going on. We'll definitely see more of her later in the series. She's a challenging one because she's not nice, and like not nice in a way that like feels kind of bad. So and without spoilers, the events of Radiant Sin make her significantly less nicer. And so there's going to be some contention with that they'll have to deal with along the way.
So this is something we were talking about earlier. Kiana asks, how many, so seems to be some crossover between the Wicked Villain series and the Dark Olympus. How many years apart are they? I know you have an answer to this. And can we expect to see any of the characters in Wicked Villain in any future Dark Olympus books?
So I don't have like a specific, like Wicked Villains happens first chronologically. And then after the end of that series, this series happens like within a couple of years, I would say. I haven't actually like mapped out exactly because I know in Learn My Lesson, Hades says how long it's been since stuff happened. And I know how old Hades is at the beginning of Neon God. So it's approximately like less than 5 years, I would say. We won't see Carver City folk in the main Olympus series just because it's so focused on the conflict that's coming from a different source. And so to bring them in would kind of like dilute that a little bit. Will they show up in shorts and novellas and whatnot? Probably. I have a Hades short, like a reunion short, just because I needed to, well, my Patreon needed to see that, and I was happy they did because I needed to write it. Just to kind of button up those feelings for me. But yeah, not like within the main series itself, like maybe in some of the extra content.
So maybe I misunderstood the question because we were
sorry.
talking. No, you had it right.
Yeah.
About how it's sort of like the multiverse. It's not really in the same.
Oh, so I joke that my writing's like the multiverse, but some of it's more directly connected. So like Wicked Villains and Dark Olympus are directly connected. Whereas like the Deal with the Demon series, like, does it happen in the same world? it's probably a different realm. It's probably not like our Earth. And some of my paranormal stuff crosses over a little bit more loosely, but it's kind of explained away by like the multiverse or whatever you want to call it.
I will call it that.
Disney, don't come after me. It's fine.
All right. I mean, they can't have a copyright on that, right?
Who knows?
So I can also ask you, are you planning on writing a book about Hermes?
Yes, Hermes is book 10. I am terrified of it. It's going to be great because she's my favorite character, and I always save the best for last, but it also makes sense plot wise for her to be last. But writing from her point of view is going to be very interesting because she's very complicated.
Well, all of your characters are pretty complicated. Can we get a revenge scene with Achilles somehow beating Paris in revenge for what he did for Helen and for shooting an arrow at him in the competition?
Achilles is letting Helen fight her own fights with that. He's just in the back cheering her on, like, you get it, shoot that arrow at him, hit him again.
Love it. And Lisa wants to know, will there be more deal with the demon books?
Yes, there are. So the Gargoyle one comes out at the end of next month, like March 28th, I believe. And then there's 2 more after that. They're going to be spaced out a little bit more just because my schedule is pretty wild right now. But there's basically all the main leaders get one. There's a succubus one, and then the final one is with like our daddy demon Azazel and Eve.
I don't know how you keep them all straight. They're probably like little
It's
demon
the
children.
ADHD, like it works in like my favor sometimes.
Okay. So I'm going to go back to my questions, and some of them are related to what Eloisa was saying, but mine was to start with like your the sexuality, which Eloisa mentioned, is really intense in your books, and in terms of like really having almost everything, every kind of sexuality on the spectrum there and within your characters. And so like her, I'm wondering, like, how do you research that? How do you go into, I mean, I know you have some friends that are different parts of the spectrum, but how do you actually research to make it authentic?
There was a period of time where I was very actively like deep diving into the various like facets of kink and like what that looks like in different ways. And at the core of it, all those interactions, at the core of it is like a very similar relationship dynamic that when you know that and you understand how that works, the rest is just taste. So it's very strange how I do it, because I do it like I mentioned before, reverse, that I'm like, I'll write and then I'll be like, I think I did not plan on this particular kink or whatever to be in here, but I guess we're doing it. The one exception was Eros and Psyche, that my editor was the one who's like, what if we did mirrors? And I was like, that is perfect. That is like thematically brilliant. We're going to do that. But the rest of them, I've kind of like navigated myself. Like it's very interesting because so once I know, like, have a name for a thing, then I talk to my friend who has a lot of experience with it, and then I do my own little research, but a lot of it's just intuitive, and then checking if I'm not sure about things to make sure that I'm not like veering into like harmful. But it's pretty, for me anyways, I don't want to say simple to avoid, because it's like the character's informed. So like if they overstep, that's intentional, and that's something that needs to be addressed in text, which we haven't done much of, but we will at some point, because like that's very interesting. And I think that it's unrealistic to expect for a dominant to always know what their submissive needs. And so like open communication obviously is a fun challenge for me to be like, how do you make that sexy? And how do you make consent to be like really attractive and to be part of the foreplay instead of just like, hey, is this good for you? Cool. But I do want to show like what happens when you miscommunicate and you misstep, and like you need to say for it out, and like how do you take care of that? I'm not sure which book that'll go in yet. The characters will inform it. They'll tell me.
Well, I guess for me, like, I think that the spectrum is so wide, and there, I think in a different panel that you were on, we talked about like, what if somebody's ace? How do you incorporate somebody who is ace and asexual essentially into a sexual story, a story of sexuality?
Yeah, I get asked about Dionysus a lot, and I asexuality, like we said, is a spectrum, and there are plenty of people who are on that spectrum who are not like sex repellent. But
Mhm.
as somebody who's not ace, I don't think it's not my place to put an ace person in an erotic romance series. Like that's something for an ace person to do. And I think that it could be done, but like I just am, it feels a little like it's just not really my lane, like that in particular. Like I want that represented. And like Apollo he vibes demisexual, but like I don't like to label it on the page just because I exist on vibes alone. And like I don't want people to be like, well, that label, like I like labels. They make me very happy, but I feel like sometimes we get caught up on them, and it's just like everybody's queer, everybody's like, they have their own ways that they deal with attraction, but he felt very like he needs that emotional connection before the sex follows. But because I didn't want it to be like the big representation for demi people, because that's again not really my place, I kind of just like, if you vibe with it, it's there. If you don't, that's okay too. But Dionysus is different, and he's like, the more I write him, the more he feels aromantic. So it would be a shoehorning in, and that wouldn't serve you or me or anybody else.
Right. So I'm going to go back to sex in a minute, but I want to talk about love, because now you use sexuality and sex to create relationships. And you just said that with Apollo, he needs to feel that connection before he actually has sex. So how do you represent the various forms of love on the page?
This sounds so boring, but the character informs it. Like I really enjoy, because I like writing high heat. It's fun for me. It's fun to put people like Aphrodite and Hephaestus in the next book who hate each other and may actively want each other dead. Like, what happens if they have to be contractually intimate physically? Like, what does that look like? Like, how do you allow yourself to be vulnerable physically when you want to, choke that person to death or something? Like, what does that look like? And similarly, like with Hades and Persephone, it's like, like the sexual attraction was there, but the intimacy, I like to build the intimacy a little bit slower. So it's like, yeah, I could do the sex thing and we can do sex stuff and I can trust you with my body, but like my heart's a little bit more guarded. And it's just, I have a lot of fun with that, like, because it feels contradictory to be like, no, I don't like you, I hate everything about you, but like, okay, there's only one bed, so I guess that's how it's going to work.
My favorite
So it's a lot
trope.
of fun for me to like, because it causes friction with them, and it's like, oh, the hate to want it and hate to want you, and it's just, I really enjoy that dynamic. So it crops up again and again and again, and that just irresistible urge that boils over at times when it should not.
Well, that is an interesting concept for this particular book, because it is what we were talking about earlier, the soft spot, or like that middle book between like heavy and heavy. So
Yeah.
Talk about that a little bit.
I was so worried about this one, because when I was writing it, like the power dynamics, even though Cassandra doesn't feel particularly beholden to Apollo, like she likes him a lot, she respects him a lot, but like she would quit that job in a hot second with no, like, just bye. But he, because he is actually like a unicorn, he's a good person in Olympus, is incredibly aware of that power dynamic and doesn't want to put her in that position where she feels uncomfortable or feels like he's pressuring her because of that difference. And so getting them into bed together was like, I was like, I don't know how we're going to make this work, because he would never do that. And so I kind of I put more thought into the sex behind this book than any other book I've done, just because there was so much caring and concern for each other and genuine, like, we want this to be okay. And it's like, and then also we're on this sort of spy mission, which it doesn't make sense to be having sex while we're doing spy stuff. So like, how do we make this happen? And it was something I really struggled with, and then they're just so sweet together. So I had to go through a couple times and like ramp up the heat, because the emotions overtook everything, which is awesome and it's great and it made it really strong, but we needed the spice there because it is a Dark Olympus book.
Well, apparently we'll read anything that you write. So, and I do mean everybody in this Zoom. So it can be soft, it can be hard, it can be, because we know you'll get us to the happy ending, we'll say.
Yeah.
So I have something that I have to ask you, because when I was a kid, I wrote a Nancy Drew book. It was a romance. She and Ned kissed. And I was just like, that was me thinking this. So like when you were a kid and reading the mythology, were you like, ooh, this needs to be hotter?
It wasn't really until, because when I read the original myths, it was kind of like, oh, like, why is everybody getting turned into trees or like dying terribly? Like, this sucks. But it's when I started reading all the content warnings. Sarah Douglas was like an author that was incredibly popular in like the late 90s, mid to late 90s, probably before then, but like that's when I found her. And she wrote this series called The Troy Game. And again, all the content warnings, but it like, I hated the first book, but I couldn't stop reading. And it's like reincarnation around like Ariadne and the Minotaur and Theseus and these horrible people that kind of like nodded to the myth here and there. And it just like watching them play out their lives in different time periods, like really did something for me, that it's like, oh, like, and it was very sexy. And I mean, sometimes not sexy, but like it became one of my favorite series, and like was like, oh, this is how it would look if these myths were like pulled out and like extended, and we deep dove into the characters being awful to each other, because most of them are, like a good portion of them. And so that's sort of where I was like, I probably were the kernel of, that's why I have an Ariadne and Minotaur book in this series, is because of that series specifically. It's her fault.
No, we're thankful to her. But what about you had said like your sweet spot, sort of like the fairy tales, and those can be kind of violent, like the original ones, but they're not. There's no heat there. So, like, how do you?
No, it's very interesting, because if you go back far enough, or in certain versions of them, like you definitely find more like assault than like consensual good times. But it's just, I think where I land on it is, I feel like horror and romance are kissing cousins, because they both incite really strong emotions in the reader if done well. And while those are very different emotions, unless you're reading dark romance, then it very lends naturally to be like, oh, what if we took this and made this dark but also romantic? And it's interesting, because I once upon a time wanted to be a young adult author, and when I did, because there's no sex in it, I found that my horror like meter went way up. And so it's very like, it just felt natural to me to jump from one to the other, which I don't know if that's weird or not. Now that I'm saying it, I'm like, yeah, of course there's no sex, so there must be horror.
Or Game of Thrones, where they have both.
Right.
So I will ask my question about sex, though, that how, when you, especially because you said that, you're going to have the polyamorous, and, I know like that you have the watchers. How do you like, do you have dolls? I mean,
Yes.
I've heard that you like block, like some people block out sex scenes like they do action scenes. How do you do it?
So when I have these Barbies that because like when I started writing polyamorous books, I was like, I want to make sure that somebody's not sprouting an extra arm, or like a leg's not doing a thing it's not supposed to do. And so I found these like yoga Barbies that are like bendable, and they work. It shows like I'm like, well, if this Barbie can get in this position, then this person probably could get in this position. This makes sense to me. And I'm very visual, so it's helpful to see it in a way that like I can move them around. I don't have to go like deep diving into the internet to see, like that would be very distracting. But I'm finding that the more I do it, or the more I write these types of books, the easier it is to navigate, because ultimately the human bodies can only arrange themselves in so many positions. So it's taking those known positions and making them still feel fresh because of the characters involved.
Right. And I think, I mean, your books are some of the first I've read where they have so many different possibilities for sexual encounters. And so I think that it's always interesting to see what you come up with. And I just
sometimes
wonder, like,
I surprise myself.
On.
every once in a while it's like, hey, is that possible? Let's get out the Barbies and find out. And then it's like, oh, it is cool. Good job, me. Let's do that, finish that scene.
Well, just do you think that some of that came about because there was only limited? I mean, so like you have to add another body, another person, another relationship into it.
It's when I start with like, I like to start with character archetypes. And so how I ended up with polyamory is that I was like, well, what if was putting a third and doing a triangle, like how each leg of the triangle interacts with each other could be completely different, which creates, I mean, sometimes it's a headache, I'm not going to lie, but like it creates some really interesting like dynamics and friction, which means like for example, I keep talking about the next one, but it's polyamorous, but it's an open poly knot. So they're not all intimate with each other, and Pandora is open completely, but it's the dynamics between each individual pairing is completely different. Like Aphrodite and Hephaestus hate each other. It's vicious and really rough, and like, you know, with like a weirdly sweet center. It's hilarious. Pandora and Aphrodite are super soft, like just incredibly soft and like nurturing, and just like, oh, your curiosity, like here's this fun thing. And then Adonis and Hephaestus are soft in a very different way because they are so wounded, and they kind of see in each other like a kindness that they weren't getting in other places, which creates like this really interesting dynamic when you kind of shake them all up, because it's like, oh, how does this interact with this? And it's the characters that like make it like giddy for me, because I don't write friends to lovers all that often because it's just not my favorite. But if you throw in a friends to lovers with an enemy in a polyamorous relationship, that's very interesting, and I like that a lot. So yeah.
That's amazing. Just that you're able to think outside of the, you know, I'm going to say box, because so many of us romance readers have been in that box for so long that it's so refreshing to see so much coming out of you know, different authors who just can see things so differently. So here's an audience question. It's a little bit long, so I'm going to read the whole thing because I'm not quite sure I get all of it. We know that 13 knows the Dark Olympus Hades being alive, and if I'm not mistaken, the 13 who were there when Hades learned my lesson knew he was alive when he walked out of Olympus. So does that mean that they all knew that both were alive, but just kept the two Hades suffer and mourning their whole? I actually also want to know if Andreas really knew and lied about telling Hades his father was dead. I hope there are no spoilers in there. I'm so sorry.
They're only for Neon Gods, so it's fine. It's been out for a couple of years at this point. Like, yes. The short answer is yes. They were well served to have a very young and an untried Hades off in the lower city, not causing problems and controllable, because as one of the legacy titles, Hades potentially has equal power to Zeus, but not when he's a 13 or like a 3-year-old kid. And yes, Andreas did know, but you know, if the alternate is to have this 3-year-old or this child get killed, like obviously he's going to lie to protect. Was it the right call? I don't know if it was the right call, but he didn't do it maliciously. He did it out of like, you know, potentially misguided, but Hades left and didn't come back. So what was he going to do? He was doing the best he could. So, yes.
I love the eyebrow going up on that one.
Yeah. We see a little bit more because we return to the underworld, or to the lower city in God, I can't keep track. Book 6 with Eurydice. And so we see a bit more because Charon is related to Andreas. And so we see a bit more of like what it looks like now that, like in the aftermath of Hades and Persephone.
Somebody wants to know when the Etsy shop will be back.
March sometime. We're shipping Kickstarter right now. So when that launches, or like when that's all gone, it'll be relaunched with some, like I got the logos of the 13 designed, so there'll be stickers and stuff. But yeah, I'll announce on social media and newsletter when it's up. So
Okay,
yes,
I'm here for that. So Kiana says, since Greek Greek mythology tends to end in tragedy. Can we expect to have any not so happily ever afters? Also slightly off topic, but I noticed your Chainsaw Man t-shirt, love it. And do you have any
Yes.
romance anime in general that you recommend?
There won't be any like tragic with the main characters because I write romance, not tragedies, and we do not break that rule. Will there be upsetting things that I don't know. The series is harsh in some ways but soft in others, but like where I hurt you is like the stuff with Andreas, or it's like, oh no, like that doesn't feel good, even though it worked out in the end. We'll see. We're building up some interesting stuff. I'm hoping I didn't bite off more than I can chew, but I trust my editor, it will be fine. But yeah, as far as anime, I don't watch a ton of romance anime. Like I really enjoy Yona of the Dawn, like the manga, but it's like the most slow burn romance that we're however many volumes in and they've like kissed once. So I usually gravitate towards more like Chainsaw Man or Jujutsu Kaisen, or of course Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood, which that's just one of those things I'm like, I ship these characters, or like My Hero Academia, the more fanon than canon, because the fandom is very interesting. So no, I don't have a lot of recommendations, unfortunately.
It's okay. The t-shirt's awesome. And Madeline asks, are there going to be any more Sabine Valley books? I need to see Ezekiel's story.
It's on hold indefinitely right now. It's not bringing me joy and I don't really have time to write it. So it's just on pause until either it brings me joy again or it fades into the ether. I'm not sure. It's it's the upsetting part of being a creative is sometimes a story will just dry up on you, and I am exceedingly aware of like how close I flirt with burnout sometimes, and so pushing through is just not a good idea for me, and it would be an unsatisfying story for you. So I know it's a bummer. I hate unfinished series. CL Wilson has a series that I check on every 6 months, and it's fine. I support her. I hope she's happy. It's wherever she is. But I definitely understand as a reader. But yeah, it's on hold indefinitely. I don't have a date. It won't be the next couple of years though. So
okay. Do you have do you know how many will be in this particular series of the Olympus series?
yes, there will be 10 and it will cap at 10. I don't know what happens after that as far as like what I write, but it is capped at 10 because I planned through 10 books. I know how it ends. I know how we get there. Stretching it past that feels a little disingenuous because you got to tell the story, that and the arc is the thing that I planned with book 1 that shifted a little bit, but it's pretty concrete. So I don't know where we go after that. We'll find out together.
Maybe Ezekiel's story, who knows?
Yeah.
Well, I think that is something that has happened in the paranormal world, is that you get these series and they just never end, and I love it, but
I love it, but I also I live in fear of being a supernatural, in that like it should have ended up season 5. Listen, don't come for me if you loved it after that. It's fine. There was good seasons after that, but season 5 was so tight, and so the payoff through the end of that season was so concrete that then it got popular and they just kept going, which is fine. And there was some, like I said, some good stuff in there, but I don't want to just be, and I also like don't like being chained to stuff indefinitely. And so I know where the story is. I guarantee you something will arise that I will spin off and like ride into the sunset, like telling more stories. So you'll keep hearing from me. It just might not be this particular series.
Well, I think that makes a lot of sense, because sometimes you can really tell that an author had this many planned, and then the publisher said, hey, this is really popular, let's keep going, and then it's like this whole nother thing.
Well, and there's usually like some of them recover and some of them don't, but like there's usually like 2 or 3 books in there where it's like you can tell that they're kind of like, I don't know, man, like we'll figure it out, I guess. And then when they find their feet again, it's awesome. But it's I can see the struggle, like from like the craft point where it's like, oh, I know that I can see that you are struggling here and I feel for you. I don't want that.
So actually Madeline's question made me think of this, is that do you ever write books based on reader feedback? or characters?
No.
Okay.
No, just because I find that I work best in like a very limited vacuum where like I like to share stuff and like, but I do it less now than I used to just because I'm working so far ahead of where people are reading. It's mean to share Eurydice when they haven't read the Cruel Seduction. But I, as a storyteller, like I've done this long enough that I feel very confident in my craft and I feel very confident in my team, who is the people I go to when I'm like, I don't know what's happening. And I think that sometimes readers think they want something, but if I did it the way that they think they want it, it wouldn't feel good. Like kind of like the Stephanie Meyer thing, where like you can tell that she just wanted everybody to be happy because the Team Jacob, Team Edward thing was so strong. And like the way that she wrapped it up felt very unsatisfying for a number of people, just because it felt like that, you know, like she's trying to please everybody. And so I find that I prefer to kind of stick to my core story and stick to my thing. And like where I run into issues, I talk to like my editor or a few close friends who are willing to just let me talk at them. But yeah, like for example, Zeus and Hera, if I gave you Zeus and Hera in book 5, there would be no interesting stuff going on in the background. Like there'd be no tension there because they'd be living out their happily ever after through the last 5 books. So that's a relationship you have to like work through. But yeah, I'm really excited for that one. I got to write their wedding night for a thing for Cruel Seduction coming in August. And I'm very excited for their book too. Trust me, I'm in agony as well.
Yeah, I mean, obviously we've all read series where like that one character that starts at the beginning and you finally get that payoff in that book 5 or 10 or whatever, and you're just like, oh, it's so good.
Well, I always wonder, like for like Cressley Cole with Nyx, it's like, are we ever going to get Nyx's story? And if we don't, like, I might be okay with it because she's such an ambiguous, like, chaos character. Like maybe that's just where she needs to be. I don't know. It's as an author, Nyx terrifies me because I cannot imagine for so many books writing this side character that's so beloved and then trying to get in their head and do justice to it.
Well, one of my favorite books, historical romance, is Slightly Dangerous by Mary Belloc. And you know, that had been 6 books in the making and it was wonderful. It's probably one of my favorite books of all time. So it can be done. It can, sometimes it's great, sometimes it's not. So somebody's asking, can't wait for Zeus and Hera's book. I feel like Eris and Callisto are in the same level of chaos. Are we going to see any interactions with them?
Yes. Interestingly, well, I guess because Eris is so focused on her events in Cruel Seduction. I'm trying not to spoil Radiant Sin. Her events in Cruel Seduction, that she doesn't interact with her sister-in-law all that much, but I think we'll see more of that. Like Callisto starts making moves like later on, starting in book 6. That's where we are. Yes, 6, Eurydice's book. So and then the moves be making. I'm very excited.
Awesome. So one of the things we were talking about earlier and you had just mentioned is what do you think is the difference between a dark romance and what you write? Or is there?
I think dark romance is a pool, and like I write on the shallow end of it where there's like, you know, you might deal with some darker elements, some murder, some like occasionally dubious consent, not in this series so far, but it might come, I don't know. Whereas like then you have books like Haunting Adeline, which I loved very much, but that book is on a completely different level than my books. And I think, I mean, I find that I've thought about this a lot because I grapple with dark romance because it's obviously it's like a fantasy, but it's like this bothers me, but also I can't stop reading. And I think it kind of hits that spot between romance and horror where it's the thrill and the potentially fear and like the of horror, but like you get the romantic element and you get the assurance of the soft spot landing for like romance. But you get those heightened emotions that come through these like really extreme sequences sometimes. I mean, there are authors who kind of go for shock value, which is not my favorite, but dark romance does some really interesting work and I love it a lot. And I am returning to it more firmly next year for one book for the next Kickstarter. And it's just a lot of fun. Like, it's a lot of fun to do the things that you're like, this is bad. Like, you just read the content warnings, skip it if you need to, no hard feelings. Like, it's not for everybody, but sometimes, like, when I'm in a book slump, that's what I go to, because I know it'll shock me out of it, especially if it's in like good hands, like H.D. Carlton's. Like, I don't know how she does it, but I want to pick apart her books craft wise, because it's such a delicate needle to thread. And again, it's not for everybody. So content warnings, check the content warnings always.
Yeah, but it's interesting because Pam was just saying that earlier, that on WBEUR, they talked about dark romances and they included you in that list. And you were starting to say, well, so I just wanted to kind of get a good sense from you.
I will say, like, Wicked Villains is much more firmly in dark romance territory than Dark Olympus is. Like, by the end of it, it gets a little soft, because I've been in this like weirdly soft space, like, writing for a while now. I will see where I end up. I think it's partly in response to the pandemic that it's like, I need the escape, and the escape just going to be a little soft right now. But yeah, it's very interesting. I think it's a spectrum like anything else. I'm more on the shallow side of things. There are authors doing like some pretty hardcore stuff that I find very fascinating. I just haven't done it myself.
Well, and one of the things that Eloisa was talking about is that there's so much more acceptance for everything on these spectrums, all of these different spectrums, like sexuality and dark romance and, monster romances and all of those things that are really widely accepted now. And it's so nice.
It's really wild to see my monster romance covers with the old school clench on bookshelves all over the place, because I love those covers. Like, I love those covers with my entire soul. They were so self-indulgent, but it is like, I ran into somebody locally who like recognized me, and she was holding The Dragon's Bride in her hand, reading in public, and I'm just like, high five. Like, that's amazing. I have no shame, but it's cool to see somebody in the early 20s kind of embodying that as well.
Yeah, like I said, it's so accepted that and people can access these things much more easily than before with KU and all of that. So I think it's really, really nice for people to be able to write what they want to write, and for readers to read what they want to read. Yeah.
As much as there's like the oversaturation of the market and whatnot, but there is, for anything that you can imagine that you're like, I think I might want to read like this and this and this book. It exists and it's waiting for you to find it. You just got to be able to search properly. And that is such a cool place to be as a reader, because it's like, I'll go to like TikTok and be like, I really want like a mutual stalking book. Weirdly enough, that one's hard to find, but like, I'll have like a random, like, I watch this movie and I want to read something like this, and TikTok or Twitter or wherever will be like, here's 12 books that you should check out. And it's magical. I love it.
Yeah, it really is. And, I was going to say something about it, but I completely forgot what it was because I was so infatuated with what you were saying. So one last question is from Lisa, and I think we can find this on your website too, is what is After Radiance and what is the next book? When is it coming out? Tell us more.
So the next book is Cruel Seduction. It will be out in August, and it is an open Pauline knot with Aphrodite, Hephaestus, Adonis, and Pandora. Because my editor is amazing, and I was like, I want to write like another polyamorous, and she's like, what if it was 4? And I was like, I won't regret writing that at all. And it's my favorite book of the series, which I say every new book. So and it's a marriage of convenience. It's a hate to be married to you. There's a lot of, like, you can find all the tropes, tags, and content warnings on my website as always, but it is it goes 0 to 60 and it does not slow down through the whole thing. So this one was a nice breath of fresh air. We took a breather, we took a pause, and now we are diving right in with the next one. So I'm incredibly excited for that. I'm having entirely too much fun with this series.
So that's the next book in this series, but I also see on your website, The Gargoyles.
The Gargoyles Captive. Yes, that will be out the end of next month. That's the 3rd/4th. The Deal with the Demon books happen concurrently, so I need to take the numbers off them because it doesn't matter what order you read it in. But it is Grace's book, which if you read Court of the Vampire Queen, Grace comes from that book into this one, and it hurt my feelings. So mind the content warnings with that. As always with the Deal with the Demon, it's, you know, monster goodness, but also like there's a lot of like really heavy emotional stuff going on, because that's monster romance for me, apparently.
But we need that. We need all of it, you know, like we need the romance, the struggles, all of it. And you do it so well in whatever format that you're doing it in. So I love it. So that's time for us. I know Cassie was going to come back and just say one last thing, but I do want to say thank you, Katie, for this amazing conversation.
Thank you so much for having me. I always love chatting with you.
And I look forward to it every single time. And for everybody who's here, you know, we really hope that you've enjoyed it and that you will buy Katie's books. Of course you will. And I work in a library, so if you can't find them, if you can't get them at the bookstore, find them at your library. Just read.
Yes.
All right. Well, have a wonderful night, everybody. And hey, there's Cassie.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Nina and Katie. That was such a wonderful discussion. It's really great. What a perfect way to end a Saturday. I'm really eager to go finish my copy of Radiant Sin. So if you would like a copy, click the link in the chat, and that will link you to all of Katie's books available in our store and on our website. All of them.
Yes, I'll read all of them. And I think Katie said that this series should be read in order. I'm always an order reader, so I do.
I mean, I just got tagged in somebody reading Radiant Sin the first without reading any other book, and she's like, I'm doing fine. I was like, okay, you know what? I'm proud of you. So live chaotically if you feel the need to.
Right. Do what you do, just read. So thank you, Cassie, for having us. And Katie, have a wonderful night and happy reading, everybody. Good night.
Everyone.